Greetings and welcome to another FJC thing. In this episode we're going to have a look at an Atari 600XL and we're going to imbue it with some tasty upgrades, the first of which is going to be the ultimate 1 megabyte. So sit back and enjoy. Hello and welcome everyone to part 2 of this little 600XL series. In the previous video I upgraded the RAM to 64K and fixed up the video output. I also did some renovations to the casing here. It was in a pretty bad state when it turned up. I didn't film that, but I did put some photos in the video to show you before and after the amazing transformation that this little machine's gone through. And for many people that would be enough. More RAM, better video. It gives you a machine which is functionally equivalent to an 800XL, but with a much smaller footprint and a tremendous cute factor. I think it's a really lovely little machine. Now what we're going to do is install Ultimate 1 megabyte. I'm still waiting for the Sophia DVI at the time of filming at least. So we'll leave that one for now, but we'll put Ultimate 1 megabyte in the machine. And the first thing we need to do here, it's not absolutely essential, but I'm going to do it, is we're going to replace the OS ROM and MMU sockets here, which means I have to use this awful desoldering pump that keeps blocking up all the time. But what can you do? I'll just have to get on with it. So let's go. So I'm going to add more solder first before we use the desoldering pump, just to loosen things up a bit, get some leaded solder in there. Has a lower melting point than lead free, and hopefully help us to get the sockets off the board a little more easily. Took the chips out the top side as well, just because I don't want the chips themselves to be sinking heat while I'm trying to get the socket out. Yeah, it's blocked again. Oh, God. Let's get the board out of the way because it's going to splash. Oh, this is marvellous. So what happens is the solder gets towards the end of the tube here and solidifies. Oh, there we go. And it basically gets hopelessly blocked up. Oh. So this thing is absolutely so bad at the moment that I'm going to have to resort to using hot air to help get these sockets off the board. Absolutely horrendous. What? Alright. Yeah, I think before I use that desoldering pump again, I need to replace all the filters on it because it is a total and utter nightmare at the moment. Sockets removed, ready for replacement. There's a bit of a struggle under this stupid desoldering gun, but no damage done anyway. So we'll just clean up the back side of the board, put the new sockets in, put the chips back, make sure everything still works. Tap the corners, make sure they're flat. I don't think there's a stereo board going in this machine at any time, so I don't need to worry about moving the OS ROM socket to the rear. I'll put everything back in. Let's bend these pins in a little, and the machine still works. There we are, ICs and the new precision sockets. Now, on the subject of moving the OS-ROM socket to the rear of the board, as I did on my machine, in the first video I did give you a quick look at my 600XL, and since it has a dual pokey board mounted here, the pokey board overhangs across the top of the OS-ROM socket, which made it impossible to plug in the Ultimate 1MB adapter. Now, if you remove the basic socket here, take that socket off, take that chip off, you can fit a 28 pin socket, because you can see the outline of it here. So if you cut the two connected traces between the jumpers here, which are symbolized by the inner symbols, those closest to the vias themselves, and jumper in the opposing position, i.e. the outer symbols there, that will allow you to run the OS-ROM and thus the Ultimate 1MB in the rear socket. So if it did turn out that the owner wanted a stereo board and there was any reason we needed to move this back here, we could do that. And of course you don't lose basic when you're installing Ultimate 1MB, because the basic ROM becomes surplus to requirements anyway, because basic's built into the Ultimate 1MB. So now we've got the sockets in place, we can figure out where we're going to mount Ultimate 1MB, where we're going to pick up the additional signals, customize the cable so that everything fits nicely, and then we will be done. Now, if we're going to install Ultimate 1MB in the way that nature intended, which is using both mounting points at the back here, and screws and nuts and standoffs, it becomes a question of where on earth are we going to put it, because if you look at the board, it's very tightly packed, and we've got a lot of traces in this area where we'd normally fit the board. You could possibly put it over here, but then we're going to have longer cable runs coming from the operating system slot here. Not really ideal. We've got a lot of obstructions underneath in the way of capacitors and vertically mounted components, and the cartridge slot shroud is going to be in the way. The video jack's in the way. We've got, on this machine, we've got Sophia going in here later on, which is a DVI video upgrade. So really we want to put the thing over here, right over the top of the PBI connector. And how are we going to do it? Well, with extreme caution is the answer to that question. We've got a bit of space there. We've got enough space to drill a little hole. Now, if we put one hole over here, the other hole ends up having to be right over at this side here, and we've got a trace right next to it there. So we've got to be super careful. There's nothing on the back in the way in either spot. We've got to be super careful that we don't short out the screw on this little via up here. So the hole, it's got to be a 3mm hole. It needs to be so far back, but not so far back that it's actually going to slip out the back of the board. So that's what we're going to try and do. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you could really make two notches in the back here, which would keep you out of trouble, I suppose, and then just tighten the screws to sort of make the thing grip at the back. And if they do end up being two notches, then that's not really going to be a problem at all. So I'm going to mark off two holes anyway. So we can just use the board as a template, and that'll help it to be nice and straight if we just line it up with the traces behind. Ah, dear God. Right, let's try that. We've got two little dots there. Alright, so we've got two decent looking pilot holes there. As you can see, they're going to creep towards the back of the board, so they probably will end up being more like notches, but there's not really a great deal you can do about that. So we've got to creep up to 3mm here by increments, so let's do it. Now, if you don't have a drilling jig, which I don't, and it rather depends on the squareness of the drill. I did watch in an EVE video recently that the different kinds of alignments with drills. I think North American drills tend to be squarer like this, but if the handle is coming out at an angle like this, it's rather more difficult to get a vertical alignment when you're working. So it can be useful to approach the hole from different directions, because you're going to tend to push in one direction. So if you keep spinning the board around, you'll find that the hole will tend to, if there's any drift, it will in fact drift away from you. That's my experience anyway. Let's just see if there's any screw that will go through that hole already. Of course, we're going to be using nylon washers on this job because of the close proximity to various traces. We don't want anything to short out. We've done it. So there we go. You couldn't get much closer to the edge of the board than that, and believe it or not, that has missed that veer by about half a millimetre. So we put a nylon washer around that, and I think we're going to be good. So now what we're going to do is we pull out the operating system ROM, and the basic ROM can go as well. We start to figure out how long our cables are going to be and where we are going to wire things up. So that's going to go in here. Obviously we're going to have to shorten this cable in order to make a nice neat job. So the board's going to be there, the cable's going to be there, and this needs to go, there's pin one that way. So that's going to have to go around like that and like that, that kind of style. So that gives us a rough idea of how long the cable needs to be. So we'll mark that off with a pen, and we need to account for the cable going back over on itself for the purpose of strain relief. So I would say we're going to cut it about there. And put a new IDC connector on. So with the MMU cable, the connector's already on the right way around. The IDC connector doesn't need to be reversed. It does on this one because it's in completely the wrong alignment. But on this one, we're okay at this end. We'll approach the MMU from the front because, of course, we've got the cartridge shroud to go on. So we don't really want the cable to come out the back of the MMU socket. We want it to come out the front. And I would say that's going to be perfect with the little twists and turns. So we mark this cable about here, and we'll cut it there and just put the hearting connector further up the cable. Okay, so we'll do the MMU cable first. We're just going to chop that as squarely as we can right across there like so. Well, not terribly square, but good enough. I'm going to take this off. If you have spare examples of these connectors, it's probably better to use a new one than try and reuse what's already here, but I'm fairly confident I can get them off in one piece. So it's sometimes not easy, mind you, but I know if I do screw it up, I can always get another one. There, it's starting to come off now. I'm just trying to unhook these little clips. There we are, and then unhook them that way. I used to break them all the time when I was doing this, but I haven't broke one for a long time. There we are, so that's off. Just tear this off. There we go. Now put this on. Make sure pin 1 is in the correct position. Doesn't really matter from a functionality point of view, but we really want the numbers to be the right way around. So pin 1 should be on the same side as your red wire. Now of course we're going to need a little spacer to put underneath the legs of the hearting connector. Candle had a nice little drilled out template apparently, but I haven't got one. Never ever got around to making one, so I'm just going to have to make do with this. Okay, so it's in the vise. I'm just going to tighten the thing up. There we go, and then untighten it. So there we go, there's one aligned cable. So the cable is going to go across like that, and it's going to be very nice. Now the OS-ROM cable has to come around like this and like this, so it's going to have to go into the connector from this angle. So this is going to be the top. Very confusing. Okay, so it's going to come around like this and like this. So the connector has to go on this way. Yeah, it is terribly worrying that these don't clear the back of the keyboard. If they don't, that'll be fun because I'll have to completely reconstruct the cables. Yeah, I don't hold out a lot of confidence that this is gonna fit together at all. So I'm just putting these screws in from the underside of the board with a nylon M3 washer around to insulate the screw head from the traces and things underneath. Alright, so as it happens, a 15mm standoff is the perfect height for this application, but I can only find one, so I'm going to have to chop down another one of these longer ones. Perfectly the correct height, it's level and everything, but I think we're going to hit problems with these strain relief clips. So the board goes in, so what happens when I try and put the keyboard in? I dread to think. Yeah, it's even worse than you would think. The strain relief clips on the cable are going to have to go, unfortunately, which means we have to start them all over again.
God. Fortune vomits on my eiderdown once.
There we go, nice and neat. So let's do the MMU cable, get rid of the strain relief on this one as well. Alright, so after a tremendous amount of faff on, as you can see from all these offcuts of cable here, I managed to modify the OS-ROM cable so that it doesn't have the strain relief on, but I think it's still a little bit too long, so I'm going to shorten it a bit further in the quest for perfection. And I had to make a brand new MMU cable because I got the connector on crooked when I tried to shorten it, but never mind. Let's see if we can get the keyboard in, and I just want to know if this thing's going to actually close up when it's finished. That's probably the most important thing to know, and I think yes, it squeezes shut, so it's going to be good enough. I think it's just the flex cable of the keyboard pressing on top of the front of the Ultimate board there, but I think that's going to be fine. You could even file that down a bit, but God, it is a tight squeeze. Alright, so the time has come to wire up our additional Ultimate 1MB signals. So I've made a little header here. So the first one, I've picked off the signals here. I'll make a diagram later on, of course, for you. But PHI2 is coming from here, just at the tip of the screwdriver. The reset signal, the nearest via I could actually find was this one here, so to the right of that little trio of sloping vias. Read right, the via that's right next to the screw hole there, if we can get it in focus. That top one, halt, we take from the one second from the right down there, much the same as we would on the 800XL. So we'll go ahead and wire these up, and hopefully things will work. Okay, so we are all hooked up and wired up, so let's see what we get on the screen. Let's have a look. Turn the display on, and it boots. Fantastic. Hopefully that screw isn't going to short on anything when it goes back in, but that's marvellous. That's a great start. Now, of course, this version of Sparta-DOS X is absolutely ancient. 2013. That's over 7 years ago. February or January of that year, I forget which way, whether they use the US date format or not. But yeah, 7 years ago. Another thing I want to try, because there was a comment on the previous video about this capacitor being absolute total overkill, so I'd like to try a different value, a smaller cap. It's not because I want to debunk the person. I've pinned their comment actually because he's almost certainly correct, but I want to try it and I want to see that it doesn't spoil the video out. But if it is better to use a smaller value, then I'll use the smaller value. So I'm happy to be corrected on that, and it would be better for probably to use a smaller cap. So anyway, let's finish mounting the board, and to all intents and purposes the machine will be complete. I'll be happier when I know that the screws are in and they don't cause any shorts. So these screws have actually cut a thread into the board. I mean, as you can see how tight it is, that wire is going to be squashed under that pylon. What I might actually do is file out the side of the pylon so that it doesn't squash it. And of course I'll test fit some PVI devices just to make sure that the standoffs aren't obstructing anything. Nylon washers are protruding from the back. Once everything's in nice and tightly, we can just shave them off. So I've cut a tiny notch in this standoff. I don't know if you can see that at all. Focus, focus, focus. There we go. So it's got a little notch in the side, and I'm going to line that up with that wire, and it'll help to avoid flattening it. I'll route all these cables later on, but that's basically it. It's very low profile, as you can see. And we give you a good look at everything from all possible angles. Absolutely secure. Clears the keyboard. We know the case shuts. No strain relief on here, so do be careful if you take the machine apart again. Okay, so we've got this comment here from Richard Kelsch, who's I think is a regular commentator on these videos. Just a curious question, why the 220 microfarad capacitor on Chroma when a 0.022 microfarad would have sufficed, heck even a 0.001 microfarad. Chroma is high frequency only, and that 220 microfarad cap has to be overkill. Perhaps when you originally installed the modern machine it is possibly misread the value. Don't get me wrong, it works, but it is a huge cap. A great video though. Well, I didn't misread the value. I didn't have any preconception over what the value should be, so I just used what was available and tried different parts until I got a result which I found visually pleasing. So let's pick out a couple of smaller caps and see what we can do. What Richard is suggesting is a 22 nanofarad cap, and we'll see if the result is comparable to what we've already got. I mean, we could even try it without any cap at all, but I'm pretty sure that there was a reason I put a cap on. Desolder this little thing here. So let's test it. Let's test it with no capacitor at all first and see what the video looks like. See if this is all in the mind. To be honest, on this machine I can't really see any difference. But let's try the other capacitor. I'm actually inclined to leave the thing off entirely. There might have been on my machine, maybe there was a reason, maybe it was a little bit different and it looked a lot better with the capacitor installed. I'm sure I had a reason for leaving it in. Again, I can't see any difference. So Richard's correct in that respect. It doesn't seem to make a damn bit of difference using a saner value for the cap. So I'll probably leave it off entirely, but yes, Richard is correct. As far as the value of the cap is concerned, you may as well use something 22 nanofarad is perfectly adequate, or less even. So yeah, I'll update the document to show that. But you might not need it at all. I don't think it's needed. Alright, there we are. All buttoned up. Alright, so here we are in the Ultimate 1 megabyte setup menu. This is of course the original firmware. There's only one original, and so we might as well update things anyway. Alright. It's going to be slow. So there we are, everything's flashed and updated, and we can, well, we do a power cycle. I do tell everybody else to do a power cycle, so we'll do a power cycle. And we're straight into the firmware because it detected that the checksums were all wrong. It's inviting us to set things up so we can have Sparta-DOS X is on. A lot of this stuff makes sense. We set the clock, so it's 2020. It's me, and it's what the hell is it? The 11th. Yep, 11th, and it is 12:32. Good enough for me. The only thing, there's no COVOX on the machine, but COVOX can't be detected in software, so we don't know one way or the other. Everything else, it's correctly established that these things aren't there, so the options are thereby dimmed out. We can turn this on. We haven't got the side cartridge plugged in, but we will turn on the high-speed SIO. Everything else, default values should be ideal. So there you have it, one Ultimate 1 megabyte equipped Atari 600XL. So now we should be able to do divisor 0, and we can indeed. Try and run U-Flash. That's better. Divisor 0, no problem at all. So there you have it. There is our beautiful Atari 600XL. It is absolutely splendid and gorgeous. Looks like it just rolled out of the factory, and it has 64K modification, it has excellent stock video, and now it has an Ultimate 1 megabyte. And if we wanted to, we could add a side 2 cartridge, plug that in the top there, and we'd have a hard disk. Or if we wait a little bit longer, we could maybe put a side 3 into it. My god, what a powerful little machine it would be. So I hope you found that one interesting. You can probably tell how enthusiastic I am about the way this machine's turning out. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's a very, very tight fit putting all this stuff inside, and there's still one more thing to put in, but we'll save that for the next video. So yeah, that's all for now. I'll wrap it up there, and if you enjoyed it, of course, feel free to leave a thumbs up, and I'd like to hear your comments as ever. Thank you again to Richard for the comment regarding the capacitors. And yes, and please do subscribe if you'd like to see part 3 of this series. But of course, for those of you who just wanted better video and extra memory, that's basically the end of it. But part 3, we'll be looking at Sophia DVI, and it's going to make it super compatible with modern display devices. So yes, thanks again for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.